The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Josephine Ellis stood trembling on the wooden auction platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that chafed against her delicate skin. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face as she watched her father and mother turn their backs and walk away, leaving her to the mercy of strangers who viewed her as nothing more than property to be bought and sold. Arizona Territory, 1876. Bisbee was a burgeoning mining town, filled with prospectors, outlaws, and those seeking fortune in the unforgiving desert landscape. At 20 years old, Josephine had brought disgrace to her family by refusing to marry the wealthy mine owner her father had chosen for her, a man 3 times her age with a reputation for cruelty. Her rebellion had culminated in a failed attempt to flee town, caught at the stage-coach station by her father's men. Now, the Ellis family had made their final judgment. Their headstrong daughter would be sold to recoup the lost dowry and erase the stain on their reputation. Next up, we have a young woman. Strong back, good health. Bit of a troublemaker, but nothing a firm hand can't fix, the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying across the crowd of rough-looking men who eyed her with unsettling interest. Josephine kept her head down, unable to meet the gazes that traveled over her body like she was livestock. The shame burned deeper than the sun on her exposed neck, and she wished the ground would open beneath her feet and swallow her whole. Starting bid at $50, the auctioneer called out. Men began to shout numbers, each one making Josephine flinch. 60, 75, 100. She recognized some of the voices, miners and ranchers from around Bisbee. Some had wives and children, some were known for their meanness. $1,000. The crowd fell silent. The voice was deep, authoritative, and unfamiliar. Josephine finally looked up, squinting against the sun to see a tall figure at the back of the crowd. The man stepped forward and the onlookers parted to let him through. He wore a dark hat that shadowed his face, a clean white shirt despite the dust, and a leather vest. A gun belt rested on his hips, the weapon holstered but clearly well maintained. The auctioneer stammered, "Did you say $1,000, Mr. Dawson?" "You heard me," the man replied, now close enough for Josephine to see his face. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with sharp blue eyes and a strong jaw covered by a neat beard. $1,000 for the lady. No one challenged the bid. The auctioneer, clearly eager to close this unusual transaction, banged his gavel quickly. "Sold to Preston Dawson." The stranger Preston Dawson approached the platform as Josephine was untied from the post. Her arms were still bound at the wrists as she was roughly pushed toward her new owner. She stumbled on the steps, but strong hands caught her before she could fall. "Careful now," Preston said, his voice much gentler than it had been moments ago. Josephine refused to look at him. What did it matter if he spoke softly? He had just purchased her like a prized mare. "The paperwork, Mr. Dawson," the auctioneer said, extending a document. Preston signed it with a quick scrawl, handed over the money, and then, to Josephine's surprise, immediately pulled a knife from his belt. She flinched, but he only used it to cut the ropes binding her wrists. "You won't be needing these anymore," he said, letting the ropes fall to the ground. People were staring now, murmuring among themselves. Preston ignored them, placing a protective hand on Josephine's back and guiding her away from the auction platform. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To my ranch," he answered simply. "It's about an hour's ride west of town." They walked in silence through the crowded streets of Bisbee. Josephine felt the stares of townsfolk who had witnessed her humiliation. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental, but most just seemed curious about the man who had paid such a high price for Ellis's troublesome daughter. At the edge of town, a handsome chestnut horse was tied to a hitching post. Preston checked the saddle and then turned to Josephine. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, still wary. "Good." He helped her mount and then swung up behind her. The closeness made Josephine tense, but Preston maintained a respectful distance as much as possible in the shared saddle. He clicked his tongue and the horse began to move, carrying them away from Bisbee and the life Josephine had known. They rode in silence for some time, the desert landscape stretching endlessly around them. Finally, Josephine found her voice again. "Why did you buy me?" she asked bluntly. Preston didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. "I don't believe people should be for sale." Josephine twisted to look at him over her shoulder, disbelief evident in her expression. "Then why participate in the auction?" "Because it was the only way to stop what was happening." He paused. "I saw your family leave. I know who they are, respected folks in town from what I hear. What they did wasn't right." "They said I brought them shame," Josephine whispered, the words catching in her throat. Preston's arms tightened slightly around her as he guided the horse around a rocky patch. "Well, Miss Ellis, from what I saw, you've got more pride and courage than the lot of them combined." Josephine fell silent, unsure how to respond to this unexpected assessment. No one had ever suggested her stubborn nature might be something to value. The landscape gradually changed as they rode. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and mesquite. Eventually, a valley opened before them, greener than the surrounding area, with a creek running through it. Nestled in this oasis was a modest but well-built ranch house, a large barn and several corrals containing horses of various colors. "Dawson Ranch," Preston announced as they approached. "It's not much compared to some, but it's mine, free and clear." As they drew closer, Josephine saw a wizened older man emerge from the barn. He waved at their approach, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "That's Hank," Preston explained. "Been with me since I started this place. There's also Maria, who helps with the cooking and keeping the house. That's all. It's a small operation, but we do all right." Preston dismounted first, then offered his hand to help Josephine down. She hesitated before accepting, her feet landing unsteadily on the ground after the long ride. "Boss." "Didn't expect you back so soon," Hank called as he approached. His curious gaze settled on Josephine. "And with company, no less." "Hank, this is Miss Josephine Ellis. She'll be staying with us," Preston said, his tone making it clear he wouldn't be explaining further at the moment. "Miss Ellis, this is Hank Wilson, the best horse trainer in the Arizona Territory, though don't tell him I said so or he'll get a swelled head." Hank tipped his hat to Josephine. "Madam, welcome to Dawson Ranch." "Thank you," she replied uncertainly. "I'll take care of Thunder," Preston said, referring to his horse. "Hank, would you ask Maria to prepare a room for Miss Ellis, and perhaps some food? I expect she's hungry after all that's happened today." "Right away, boss." Hank headed toward the house, leaving Josephine and Preston alone again. "Come on," Preston said, leading his horse toward the barn. "I'll show you around before you get settled." Josephine followed, still in a daze from the day's events. The barn was spacious and clean, with stalls for at least a dozen horses. Preston removed Thunder's saddle and bridle with practiced ease, speaking softly to the animal as he worked. "What exactly am I supposed to do here?" Josephine finally asked. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Preston looked up, seeming genuinely surprised by the question. "Do?" "Well, I suppose that's up to you. You're not a servant if that's what you're asking." "But you bought me," Josephine said, confusion evident in her voice. Preston shook his head firmly. "I paid to get you out of a bad situation. I don't own you, Miss Ellis. No one does." "Then what is this?" She gestured around the barn at him, at herself. Why bring me here if you don't expect something in return? Preston sighed, leaning against the stall door. I needed to get you away from there. This seemed the safest place. You're welcome to stay as long as you like, help out if you want to, or just rest and decide what you'd like to do next. If you want to leave tomorrow, I won't stop you, though I'd prefer to know you have somewhere safe to go. Josephine stared at him, trying to determine if he was sincere. Men, in her experience, always wanted something, but there was an openness to Preston Dawson's expression that was unlike anything she had encountered before. I don't understand you, she admitted. A small smile crossed his face. That's fair. We only just met. He secured Thunder's stall and gestured toward the house. Come on. Let's get you something to eat and a place to rest. Everything seems clearer after a good meal and a night's sleep. Inside the ranch house, Josephine was introduced to Maria, a middle-aged Mexican woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She showed Josephine to a small but comfortable bedroom, provided her with a basin of water to wash, and promised that food would be ready soon. Left alone, Josephine finally had a moment to process everything. She sat on the edge of the bed, trembling slightly as the reality of her situation sank in. This morning, she had awakened in her family home, already in disgrace, but never imagining they would go so far as to sell her. Now, she was miles from Bisbee in a stranger's home, with no clear idea of what would happen next. She washed her face and hands, wincing at the raw marks the ropes had left on her wrists. There was a small mirror on the wall, and she hardly recognized the woman who stared back at her, pale, disheveled, with a wild look in her hazel eyes. She did her best to tidy her dark hair, which had partly come loose from its pins during the ride. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her efforts. Miss Ellis, it was Preston. Dinner's ready if you'd like to join us. I'll be right there, she called back, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The dining room was simple but comfortable. Hank and Preston were already seated, and Maria was placing a steaming platter of food on the table. Josephine hesitated in the doorway until Preston noticed her and stood. Please join us, he said, pulling out a chair for her. The meal was a hearty stew with fresh baked bread, simple but delicious. Josephine hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. She ate slowly at first, mindful of her manners despite everything, but soon found herself taking second helpings. Conversation flowed around her. Hank talked about a new colt that was showing promise, and Preston discussed plans for expanding the herd. They included her occasionally explaining references she wouldn't understand or asking polite questions, but never pressing when she gave only brief answers. As Maria cleared the dishes, Preston turned to Josephine. Tomorrow I can show you more of the ranch if you'd like, or if you prefer to rest, that's fine too. I'd like to see it, she said, surprising herself. I'm used to keeping busy. Preston nodded approvingly. Good. We'll start after breakfast. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed, Josephine stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of her new reality. Part of her kept expecting Preston Dawson to reveal his true motives, to demand something from her. But another part, a hopeful voice she barely recognized, whispered that perhaps she had found an unexpected ally in a world that had shown her little kindness. Morning came with the crow of a rooster, and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting through the house. Josephine dressed quickly in the same clothes she had worn yesterday, the only ones she had, and made her way to the kitchen. Maria was there, cooking, and offered her a warm smile. Good morning, Miss Ellis. Did you sleep well? Yes, thank you, Josephine replied, though in truth her sleep had been fitful at best. The men are already outside. They rise with the sun, Maria said, handing Josephine a cup of coffee. But I saved breakfast for you. After eating, Josephine went outside to find Preston. The morning was already warm, promising another scorching day. She found him by the corral, watching as Hank worked with a young horse. "Good morning, Miss Ellis," Preston greeted her, tipping his hat. "Ready for that tour? Please call me Josephine," she said impulsively. "And yes, I'm ready." Something flickered across Preston's face, pleasure perhaps, at this small sign of trust. "Josephine, then, and I'm Preston to my friends." The tour was comprehensive. Preston showed her the entire operation, the different corrals for horses at various stages of training, the pastures where cattle grazed, the workshop where equipment was repaired, the vegetable garden that provided fresh food for the house. Throughout it all, his pride in what he had built was evident. "How long have you had this ranch?" Josephine asked as they walked back toward the house. 5 years, Preston replied. "Bought it when it was little more than a shack and a few acres. Been building it up ever since." "You've done a remarkable job," she said sincerely. He smiled at the compliment. "It's been hard work, but worth it. Having something that's truly yours, there's no feeling like it." The words hit Josephine with unexpected force. She had never had anything that was truly her own. Even her life had been controlled by her father and then, briefly, by the auctioneer who had sold her to the highest bidder. Preston seemed to realize what he'd said. "I'm sorry, that was thoughtless of me." "No," Josephine shook her head. "It's the truth. I envy you that." They had reached the house, but Preston paused before entering. "Josephine, I meant what I said yesterday. You're free to choose your own path now. Whatever help I can give, I will." She looked up at him, this strange man who had spent $1,000 to free a woman he didn't know. "Why are you doing this? The truth, please." Preston considered her question carefully. "I guess I saw something in you that reminded me of myself. Stubborn, probably," he added with a slight smile. "I came out west with nothing but determination, and I nearly didn't make it. Someone helped me when I needed it most. Maybe this is my way of passing that on." Josephine nodded slowly, accepting his explanation for now. "Thank you." The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Josephine, unwilling to be idle, asked Maria to teach her about keeping the house and cooking. The older woman was delighted to share her knowledge, and Josephine proved to be a quick learner. She also spent time with Hank, who taught her about caring for the horses, and occasionally with Preston, who would explain his plans for the ranch when he had time. A week passed, then 2. Maria took Josephine into the small town nearest the ranch, much smaller than Bisbee, to buy fabric for new clothes. Preston insisted on providing the money, brushing off Josephine's protests by saying it was only fair since she was helping around the ranch. With each passing day, Josephine felt a little more of her guard lowering. Preston never made any inappropriate advances or suggestions. He treated her with consistent respect, valuing her opinions and thanking her for her contributions to the household. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Josephine sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was ablaze with colors orange, pink, and purple stretching across the horizon. She heard the door open behind her and turned to see Preston emerging with 2 cups of coffee. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, offering her one of the cups. "Please do," she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the colors deepened and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I received a letter from Bisbee today," Preston said eventually. "Thought you might want to know what's happening there." Josephine tensed slightly, but nodded for him to continue. "Your family is telling people you've gone to stay with relatives back east," he said. "It seems they're eager to put the whole incident behind them." "I'm not surprised," Josephine said, her voice tight. "That would be less embarrassing than admitting they sold their own daughter." Preston's hand moved as if to reach for hers, but he stopped himself. "I'm sorry, Josephine. No one deserves that kind of betrayal, least of all from family. She looked at him curiously. "You've never asked me why they did it, why I brought them shame, as they put it." "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to," Preston replied simply. Josephine took a deep breath. She hadn't spoken about it to anyone here, but suddenly she wanted Preston to know the truth. "My father arranged a marriage for me to Harold Wilcox, the mine owner," she explained. "He's 58 years old, has buried 2 wives already, and is known for his temper. But he's wealthy, and my father owed him money from bad investments in the mine." Preston's expression darkened. "So you were to be payment for your father's debts?" Josephine nodded. "I refused, repeatedly. When they tried to force the issue, I ran away. I made it as far as the stage-coach office before my father's men caught me. After that, well, you know the rest." "You were brave to try," Preston said quietly. "Most would have given in." "What good did it do me?" Josephine asked bitterly. "I still ended up being sold, just to a different man." Preston winced at her words. "Is that how you still see it? That I bought you?" "No," Josephine admitted after a moment's reflection. "No, that's not fair. You've been different from what I expected." "Different good or different bad?" he asked, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Good," she said softly. "Definitely good." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and something shifted between them. Josephine looked away first, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the way her heart had quickened at his smile. "It's getting late," she said, rising from her chair. "I should help Maria with the supper preparations." Preston stood as well. "Of course. Thank you for sharing your story with me, Josephine. It means a lot that you trusted me with it." As she walked back into the house, Josephine realized with a start that she did trust Preston Dawson. Somewhere in these quiet weeks, among the small kindnesses and constant respect, he had earned something she hadn't given freely in a very long time. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it felt good to trust someone again. Terrifying because trust made you vulnerable, and Josephine wasn't sure she was ready for that vulnerability just yet. The following week brought an unexpected challenge. A powerful storm swept through the valley, bringing flash floods that threatened the lower pastures where some of the cattle grazed. Everyone worked frantically to move the animals to higher ground before the waters rose too high. Josephine, despite having no experience with cattle, insisted on helping. Preston tried to convince her to stay at the house, but she was adamant. "I'm not made of porcelain," she told him firmly. "I can ride, and I want to help." In the end, he relented, giving her one of the gentler horses and simple instructions. Stay behind the herd and help keep them moving forward. Hank would lead them to safe ground while Preston handled any strays or difficult animals. The work was harder than Josephine had anticipated. The rain fell in sheets, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The cattle were nervous, the thunder spooking them and making them unpredictable. Her clothes were soaked through within minutes, and her hands grew numb on the reins. But there was also an exhilaration to it, being trusted with a real task, working alongside Preston and Hank as an equal. She drove the cattle forward, occasionally calling out encouragement to the animals or warnings to the men when she spotted a stray trying to break away. They had almost reached the higher pasture when disaster struck. A particularly loud crack of thunder spooked one of the lead cows, which turned and began running back through the herd, causing confusion and panic. The cattle started scattering in all directions. "Josephine, stay back." Preston shouted over the rain and commotion. But she had already seen a small group of calves separating from the main herd, heading dangerously close to a ravine that was rapidly filling with floodwater. Without hesitation, she turned her horse and galloped toward them, determined to head them off before they reached the edge. The ground was slippery, and her horse struggled to maintain footing. Josephine leaned forward in the saddle, urging the animal on, focused entirely on the calves ahead. She managed to get in front of them, turning them away from the ravine when her horse's hoof caught in a hidden hole. The animal stumbled, pitching forward. Josephine was thrown from the saddle, landing hard on the muddy ground. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, and for a terrifying moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then strong hands were on her shoulders, turning her over. Preston's face swam into view, his expression tight with fear. "Josephine, are you hurt? Can you speak?" She gasped, finally drawing air back into her lungs. I'm all right," she managed, though her entire body ached from the fall. Preston's relief was palpable. He helped her to her feet, keeping a steadying arm around her waist when she swayed slightly. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When I saw you fall—" "The calves," Josephine interrupted, looking around. They're fine." "Hank got them," Preston assured her. "Let's get you back to the house. You need dry clothes and to be checked for injuries." Her horse had recovered from its stumble and stood nearby, looking somewhat chastened. Preston helped Josephine mount, then swung up behind her, much as he had on that first day. This time, however, he held her securely against his chest, clearly concerned she might fall again. By the time they reached the ranch house, the worst of the storm had passed. Maria fussed over Josephine, insisting she change immediately and then sit by the fire while the older woman examined her for injuries. Besides some bruises and a sore shoulder, Josephine had escaped serious harm. Preston hovered nearby, still visibly worried. When Maria finally declared that Josephine would be fine with some rest, he relaxed slightly. "You gave us quite a scare," he told her as Maria went to prepare some hot tea. "I'm sorry," Josephine said, pulling the blanket Maria had given her more tightly around her shoulders. "I just saw those calves heading for the ravine and I reacted. I didn't think." "It was brave," Preston admitted. "Foolhardy, but brave. Those calves would likely have been lost if you hadn't turned them." Despite her aching body, Josephine felt a flush of pride at his words. "So I did help then." "You did," Preston confirmed, sitting beside her near the fire. "More than help, you were essential." The warmth that spread through Josephine at his praise had little to do with the fire. For so long, she had been told her stubborn nature, her independence, her unwillingness to simply obey were flaws. To have these same qualities recognized as valuable was a revelation. "Thank you for letting me help," she said quietly. Preston looked at her, his expression serious. "Josephine, you don't need my permission to be who you are. That fire inside you, that courage and determination, it's what makes you special. Don't ever let anyone tell you to extinguish it." Their eyes met, and this time, neither looked away. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day. Josephine felt her heart quicken, and for once, she didn't try to suppress it. The moment was interrupted by Maria returning with the tea, but something had changed. There was a new awareness between Josephine and Preston, a recognition that what they felt for each other went beyond gratitude or friendship. The following days were busy with repairs after the storm. Fences needed mending, a section of the barn roof had been damaged, and they had to check on all the cattle to ensure none had been injured or lost. Josephine threw herself into the work, ignoring her bruises, determined to prove she was a true asset to the ranch. Preston kept a careful eye on her, but didn't try to stop her from helping. Instead, he taught her more about the daily operations, explaining his decisions and asking for her input. Josephine found herself increasingly invested in the ranch's success, offering suggestions and taking on more responsibilities. One evening, about a week after the storm, Preston approached her as she sat on the porch, enjoying the cooler air after sunset. "I have something for you," he said, holding out a small leather pouch. Curious, Josephine opened it. Inside was a stack of Bill's money and quite a lot of it. "What's this?" she asked, confused. "Your wages," Preston explained, "for your work around the ranch." "I should have done this sooner, but with everything that's been happening." Josephine stared at the money in disbelief. "You're paying me, but I've been living here, eating your food and working hard every day," Preston interrupted. "Everyone who works here gets paid, Josephine. You're no different." She looked up at him, understanding the significance of what he was doing. This wasn't charity, it was recognition of her worth, her contribution. By paying her, he was acknowledging her as an independent person with value beyond what someone might pay to own her. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. Preston sat beside her. "You don't have to say anything, but I want you to know that this money is yours to use however you see fit. If you want to save it to start a new life somewhere else or use it here, or whatever you choose, it's your decision." Josephine held the pouch, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It represented something she had never truly had before: choices, independence, freedom. "Thank you, Preston," she said softly. "Not just for this, but for everything. For seeing me as a person worth respecting when my own family couldn't." Preston's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. "You bring pride to this ranch, Josephine. Never doubt that." Their eyes met, and this time the connection between them was undeniable. Preston leaned forward slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wished. Josephine didn't move, her heart racing as his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. It lasted only a moment before Preston drew back, searching her face for her reaction. Josephine felt a smile form on her lips, and she leaned forward to kiss him again, answering his unspoken question. This kiss was deeper, surer, filled with the feelings they had both been careful not to acknowledge until now. When they finally separated, Preston kept his forehead pressed against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" Josephine asked. "Because I needed you to know that nothing was expected of you here," Preston explained, drawing back slightly to look at her. "That you were free to choose your own path, without feeling any obligation to me because of how we met." His consideration touched her deeply. "And now," Preston said, his voice low, "I hope your path might include me if that's what you want." "I think it might," Josephine replied, surprised by her own certainty. Preston smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Then we'll take it one day at a time, see where it leads us." That night, lying in her bed, Josephine replayed the kiss in her mind, marveling at how different it felt to have chosen this connection rather than having it forced upon her. There was still a part of her that remained cautious, that whispered warnings about trusting too easily. But for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps her story could have a different ending than the one her family had tried to write for her. As summer gave way to fall, the relationship between Josephine and Preston deepened. Their kisses became more frequent, their conversations more intimate, but Preston never pressured her for more than she was ready to give. He seemed content to let their feelings develop naturally, to build a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Josephine found herself sharing more of her past with him, stories of her childhood in Bisbee, of her mother's increasing distance as Josephine grew into a woman with her own mind, of her father's business dealings that had ultimately led to her being offered as payment for his debts. In turn, Preston told her about his own journey west from Pennsylvania, about the hardships he had faced and overcome, about his dream of building something meaningful that would last beyond his lifetime. "I never thought I'd find someone to share it with," he admitted one evening as they sat by the fire. "Most women I've met want town life, not the isolation of a ranch. I like it here." Josephine said truthfully. The openness, the freedom. Being able to see the stars at night without buildings or smoke in the way. Preston smiled at her, his eyes warm in the firelight. You belong here, you know. You've got more natural talent for this life than most men who have worked for me. His praise still made her blush, unused as she was to having her abilities recognized. I still have a lot to learn. We all do, Preston agreed. That's part of what makes life interesting. Their peaceful existence was interrupted in late October when a rider arrived from Bisbee. Josephine was in the garden with Maria when the man appeared, and she immediately recognized him as one of her father's associates. Her blood ran cold at the sight of him. Preston was out checking the herd with Hank, but Maria quickly ushered Josephine inside, telling her to stay out of sight while she dealt with the visitor. Josephine watched from a window as Maria met the man at the gate, speaking to him briefly before he handed her an envelope and rode away. When Preston returned an hour later, Maria gave him the envelope. His expression darkened as he read its contents. "What is it?" Josephine asked, unable to bear the suspense. "Is it from my family?" Preston nodded grimly. "Your father. Apparently, he's had a change of heart. He wants you to return home and claims the auction was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Josephine repeated incredulously. "He sold me." "He says it was a ruse to teach you a lesson about obedience," Preston said, his disgust evident. "He offers to reimburse me for my trouble and expects you to return immediately." Josephine felt herself trembling, whether from fear or anger she wasn't sure. "And if I refuse?" "The letter doesn't consider that possibility," Preston replied. "It simply states when they expect you back in Bisbee." "They?" Josephine caught the word. "Is the marriage to Wilcox still part of the plan?" Preston hesitated before answering. "Yes. He mentions that Wilcox is still willing to go through with the arrangement despite the unfortunate incident." A cold fury replaced Josephine's fear. "Nothing has changed. They still see me as property to be traded." Preston set the letter aside and moved to her, taking her hands in his. "You don't have to go back, Josephine. You know that, right? You have a home here for as long as you want it." She looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes. "What if they come for me? My father has influence in this territory." "Let them come," Preston said firmly. "You're a free woman, not a runaway slave or an indentured servant. They have no legal claim on you." Josephine wasn't entirely convinced, knowing how men like her father operated, but Preston's certainty was reassuring. "I won't go back," she decided. "Not ever." Preston squeezed her hands gently. "Then you won't. We'll face whatever comes together." Josephine's response to her father's letter was simple and direct. Preston helped her compose it, but the words were entirely her own. "Father, I am where I choose to be, with people who value me for who I am rather than what connections or advantages I might bring them." There was no misunderstanding at that auction block. Your intentions were perfectly clear, as are mine now. I will not return to Bisbee. I will not marry Harold Wilcox. I am building a new life, one of my own choosing. Do not attempt to contact me again. Josephine Preston arranged for a trusted friend who was traveling to Tucson to deliver the letter to Bisbee, ensuring her father wouldn't know exactly where she was. It was a precaution, though Preston maintained that Josephine had nothing to fear. "Your father may bluster, but he won't risk his reputation by admitting what he actually did," he reasoned. "And Wilcox won't want people knowing he tried to buy himself a wife." Despite his reassurances, Josephine felt uneasy in the days following the letter's dispatch. She found herself watching the road whenever she was outside, half expecting to see her father or his men approaching. Preston noticed her anxiety and did his best to distract her, keeping her busy with ranch work and planning improvements to the house. "I've been thinking about expanding the East Wing," he told her one evening as they reviewed his rough sketches at the dining table, "adding another bedroom and perhaps a proper study." Josephine examined the drawings with interest. It would balance the house better, and the morning light would be lovely in a study on this side. Preston smiled at her enthusiasm. "That's what I thought too. We could start the work this winter when there's less to do with the cattle and horses." The casual "we" wasn't lost on Josephine. Preston increasingly included her in his future plans, never explicitly asking her to stay permanently, but making it clear he hoped she would. The tension from her father's letter gradually subsided as weeks passed with no further communication from Bisbee. Josephine began to believe that perhaps Preston was right, that her family would prefer to pretend the whole incident never happened rather than pursue her and risk scandal. As November brought cooler temperatures, life on the ranch settled into its winter rhythm. There was still plenty of work, but the pace was less frantic than during the warmer months. In the evenings, they often gathered in the main room, where Preston would read aloud from one of his books while Josephine and Maria worked on sewing or mending. It was during one of these peaceful evenings that Preston closed his book earlier than usual and cleared his throat nervously. "Josephine, would you like to take a walk? The night is clear and the stars are particularly bright." She looked up, surprised by his sudden request, but intrigued by the unusual note in his voice. Of course. They bundled up against the night chill and stepped outside. Preston was right, the sky was magnificent, a vast canopy of stars stretching from horizon to horizon. He led her to a small rise behind the house, where the view was even better. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, looking upward. "Breathtaking," Josephine agreed, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Preston turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Josephine, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Having you here, working alongside you, watching you bloom into the strong, confident woman you were always meant to be, it's been a privilege." Josephine felt her heart quicken at his words. "Preston, please, let me finish," he said gently. "I know how we came together was unusual, to say the least, and I've tried to give you the space and time to find your own way, to make your own choices. But I find I can't keep my feelings to myself any longer." He took her hands in his touch warm despite the cool night air. "I love you, Josephine Ellis. I love your spirit, your courage, your determination. I love the way you face every challenge head-on, the way you've made this ranch as much your home as it is mine. And if you'll have me, I would be honored to call you my wife." Josephine's breath caught in her throat. Though their relationship had been deepening, she hadn't expected a proposal, at least not yet. But looking into Preston's earnest face, illuminated by starlight, she realized this moment felt right, felt true in a way nothing in her life had before. "Are you certain?" she asked softly. "You could have any woman, someone without my complicated past." "I don't want any woman," Preston interrupted firmly. "I want you, complications and all. And I'm offering you the same, a man who isn't perfect, who sometimes works too hard and worries too much, but who will love and respect you every day of his life." Tears welled in Josephine's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Preston Dawson, I will marry you." His face broke into a radiant smile, and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, he cupped her face gently and kissed her with such tenderness that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I promise you," he said when they finally parted, "you will never have reason to regret this decision. I will spend my life making sure of it." They returned to the house hand in hand, both too happy to feel the cold. Inside, Maria and Hank were waiting, their expressions expectant. "She said yes," Preston announced, his voice ringing with pride. Maria clasped her hands together with delight, and even gruff Hank broke into a broad smile. It was clear they had known of Preston's plans and had been hoping for this outcome. "This calls for a celebration," Maria declared, disappearing into the kitchen and returning with a bottle of wine that had been saved for a special occasion. As they toasted to the future, Josephine felt a profound sense of belonging. This was her family now chosen rather than born into, built on respect and love rather than obligation and control. For the first time in her life, she felt truly at home. The wedding was set for the first week of December, to be held at the ranch with only a few close friends in attendance. Preston rode into town to arrange for a minister, and to order a special gift for his bride, the nature of which he refused to divulge despite Josephine's curious questioning. Maria helped Josephine create a wedding dress from the finest fabric they could find, a simple but elegant design that suited both the occasion and Josephine's practical nature. As the day approached, the house was scrubbed until it gleamed, and festive touches appeared: evergreen boughs on the mantels, red ribbons on the stair railings, and candles in every window. The night before the wedding, after Preston had gallantly retired to the barn to honor the tradition that the groom shouldn't see the bride before the ceremony, Josephine sat alone in her room, reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had stood on an auction platform, her future bleaker than she could have imagined. Now, she was hours away from marrying a man who valued her independence, who saw her strength as an asset rather than a liability, who loved her for exactly who she was. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Maria with some last-minute wedding detail. Instead, it was Hank who entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Miss Josephine, sorry to disturb you so late." "It's all right, Hank," she assured him. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly," he said, shifting from foot to foot. "But there's a visitor. Says he knows you, wouldn't give his name, but he's insistent on speaking with you tonight." Josephine felt a chill of apprehension. "Did you tell Preston?" "Boss is in town picking up the last things for tomorrow. Won't be back for another hour at least." Hank hesitated. "I can send the fellow away if you want. Just thought you should know." Josephine considered her options. It seemed unlikely that her father would come in person, and if it were one of his men, they would likely have been more forceful in their approach. Curiosity won out over caution. "No, I'll see him." "Where is he?" "In the main room. I didn't want to let him wander about." "Thank you, Hank." "I'll be right down." Josephine quickly checked her appearance in the mirror, smoothing her hair and straightening her dress. Then, taking a deep breath for courage, she descended the stairs. The man standing by the fireplace was not someone she recognized immediately. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent much time outdoors. When he turned at the sound of her footsteps, however, his eyes, a familiar shade of green, sparked a distant memory. "Hello, Josephine," he said, his voice soft but steady. "You probably don't remember me. I'm your uncle, Thomas Ellis." Josephine stared at him in surprise. Her father's brother had left Bisbee when she was very young, following some disagreement between the siblings that was never discussed in her presence. "Uncle Thomas, what are you doing here?" "How did you find me?" He smiled slightly. "It's a long story. May I sit? It's been a long journey." Josephine nodded, gesturing to one of the chairs by the fire while taking the one opposite. Hank hovered in the doorway until she assured him she was fine, though he promised to remain within earshot. "I've been living in New Mexico these past 15 years, Thomas began once they were seated. "Made a decent life for myself, though nothing fancy. About a month ago, I received a letter from a lawyer in Bisbee. Your grandfather, my father, had passed away, and there were matters of inheritance to settle. Josephine's eyes widened. Grandfather died. No one told me. Thomas nodded grimly. I'm not surprised. Your father wouldn't want you to know that the old man left you something in his will. Me? Josephine couldn't hide her astonishment. But I barely knew him. He visited so rarely. He knew you, though, Thomas said. Kept track of you through friends in Bisbee. He was proud of your spirit, said you reminded him of his own mother. When I returned for the reading of the will, I expected to see you there. When you weren't, I asked about you. His expression darkened. Your father told me you had run off, disgraced the family. But something didn't sit right with his story. I started asking around town quietly. Eventually, I heard whispers about an auction, about Ellis selling his own daughter. Josephine's face flushed with shame and anger. It's true, he did. Thomas's hands clenched into fists. I suspected as much. Once I confirmed it, I tracked down the records of the sale, found Preston Dawson's name, and eventually traced him to this ranch. I had to know if you were all right, if you needed help. You came all this way for that. Josephine was touched by the concern of this uncle she barely remembered. Your family, Thomas said simply. Real family doesn't sell each other no matter what. Josephine felt tears welling in her eyes at his words. Thank you. But I'm more than all right. Preston saved me, not just from that auction, but from a life where I would never have been valued. We're getting married tomorrow. Thomas's expression softened. Married? Well, that's wonderful news. He seems like a good man from the little I've seen. Hank was quite protective of you both when I arrived. He is a good man, Josephine confirmed. The best I've known. I'm glad, Thomas said sincerely. And I'm doubly glad I found you because I have something that belongs to you. He reached into his coat and withdrew a thick envelope. Your inheritance from grandfather. Your father tried to claim it on your behalf, but the will was specific. It goes directly to you and no one else. Josephine accepted the envelope with trembling hands. What is it? The deed to a piece of land just outside Bisbee, and a sum of money that's been held in trust. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to give you a good start in life. Or in this case, perhaps, a good wedding present. Overwhelmed, Josephine didn't know what to say. That her grandfather, a distant figure in her life, had thought to protect her in this way was almost too much to process. I don't know how to thank you for bringing this to me, she finally managed. No need for thanks, Thomas assured her. I'm just sorry I wasn't around more when you were growing up. Perhaps things would have been different. Perhaps, Josephine agreed, but then I might never have met Preston. Thomas smiled at that. True enough, life has strange ways of getting us where we need to be. He glanced at the clock on the mantel. I should go. I've interrupted your evening enough and you have a big day tomorrow. You'll stay for the wedding, won't you? Josephine asked impulsively. I have so few family members who actually care about me. It would mean a lot to have you there. Thomas looked surprised but pleased by the invitation. If you're sure I wouldn't be intruding. Not at all, Josephine assured him. In fact, she hesitated before continuing. Would you consider giving me away? I know it's traditional for the father to do so, but under the circumstances. Now it was Thomas who looked emotional. I would be honored, Josephine, truly honored. When Preston returned from town an hour later, he found Josephine and Thomas still talking by the fire, catching up on years of family history. Initially alarmed by the stranger's presence, Preston relaxed when Josephine explained who Thomas was and why he had come. Your timing is impeccable, sir, Preston told Thomas after shaking his hand. And I'm grateful for the part you played in exposing the truth about what happened to Josephine. Thomas waved away his thanks. I only wish I had known sooner, but it seems things have worked out for the best. He gave Preston an appraising look. My niece speaks very highly of you. I'm the fortunate one, Preston replied, his gaze moving to Josephine with such obvious affection that Thomas smiled. "I can see that," the older man said, "and I'm glad." The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the winter sun casting a golden glow over the ranch. Josephine woke early, too excited to sleep. Maria helped her prepare, dressing her hair with small white flowers and lacing her into the simple white gown they had created together. "You look beautiful," Maria said, stepping back to admire her work. "Like an angel." Josephine blushed at the compliment. "Thank you, Maria, for everything. You've been like a mother to me these past months." The older woman's eyes glistened with tears. "It has been my pleasure to watch you find your place here, Querida. You have brought light into this house." A knock at the door announced Thomas, dressed in his best suit and looking slightly nervous about his role in the ceremony. His expression softened when he saw Josephine. "You're the image of your grandmother," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "She would be so proud of you today." The ceremony was held in the main room of the ranch house, which had been transformed with flowers and candles. Hank stood as Preston's best man, while Maria sat in the front row, already dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. A few neighbors and friends had gathered to witness the union, filling the room with warmth and goodwill. When the minister signaled that they were ready to begin, Thomas offered Josephine his arm. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, unable to speak through the emotion tightening her throat. As they moved to the doorway, her first glimpse of Preston waiting for her nearly took her breath away. He was handsome in his new suit, but it was the expression on his face as he saw her that made her heart swell. Pure love and wonder shone in his eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. The walk to his side seemed both endless and over too quickly. Thomas placed her hand in Preston's with a solemn nod before stepping back. The minister began the ceremony, but Josephine barely heard the words. All she could focus on was Preston's hands holding hers, the warmth in his eyes, the future that stretched before them. When it came time for their vows, Preston spoke with quiet conviction, promising to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life, to be her partner in all things, to value her mind and spirit as much as her heart. Josephine's voice trembled slightly as she made the same promises in return, adding her own pledge. "I promise to build our life together with the same courage and determination you saw in me from the beginning, to be a true partner in all our endeavors, and to love you freely and fully, as you have taught me love should be." The exchange of rings, a simple gold band for Preston, and for Josephine, a delicate ring with a small diamond that had been his mother's, sealed their vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss was tender but full of promise, drawing appreciative smiles from their guests. The celebration that followed was joyous and relaxed. Maria had prepared a feast, and one of the neighbors played the fiddle for dancing. Preston surprised Josephine by being quite skilled on the dance floor, whirling her around the cleared space with confident grace. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, laughing as he executed a particularly deft turn. "My mother insisted I learn," he admitted with a grin. Said no son of hers would shame her by clomping around like a draft horse at social gatherings. As the afternoon progressed, Preston drew Josephine aside. "I have something for you," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "My wedding gift." He led her outside, where Hank waited with a horse Josephine hadn't seen before, a beautiful dapple gray mare with intelligent eyes and a graceful bearing. "She's yours," Preston said, watching Josephine's face closely. "I know how much you've enjoyed riding since you've been here, and I thought you deserved a horse of your own." Josephine approached the mare slowly, allowing the animal to get used to her scent. The horse nickered softly, nudging Josephine's hand in a friendly greeting. She's magnificent, Josephine breathed, stroking the mare's silky neck. What's her name? That's for you to decide, Preston told her. She's yours in every way. Josephine studied the horse, considering. Liberty, she decided finally. Her name is Liberty. Preston nodded approvingly. It suits her. And you. They returned to the celebration hand in hand, both feeling the significance of the day, not just the ceremony that had made them husband and wife in the eyes of the law, but the deeper commitment they had made to each other, to build a life based on mutual respect and love. As evening fell, the guests began to depart, offering final congratulations and well wishes. Thomas was one of the last to leave, promising to visit again in the spring and to write in the meantime. "You've found a good man and a good home," he told Josephine as they embraced. "Your grandmother would say you've done well for yourself." "Thank you for being here," she replied sincerely. "It meant everything to have family who truly cares." Finally, it was just Preston and Josephine, Maria having tactfully retired to her room and Hank to the barn. They stood together on the porch, watching the last colors of sunset fade from the sky. "Happy?" Preston asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Josephine replied truthfully. He turned her to face him, his expression suddenly serious. "I meant what I said today, Josephine. You bring me pride in who we are together, in what we're building. I never want you to doubt that." "I don't," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "You've shown me every day since we met." Their kiss was deep and unhurried, a promise of the night to come and all the days that would follow. As they finally went inside, closing the door on the world outside, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged, not as property to be bought and sold, but as a woman valued for her true self, finally free to love and be loved in return. The years that followed were not without challenges, but Josephine and Preston faced them together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. The ranch prospered under their joint care, expanding gradually as they acquired more land and improved their breeding stock. The spring after their wedding, they began work on the house expansion Preston had proposed. By the time the project was completed in late summer, it was particularly fortuitous, as Josephine had just discovered she was expecting their first child. Preston's joy at the news was boundless. He treated Josephine with even more care than usual, though he was careful not to become overprotective, respecting her continued desire to be involved in the daily operations of the ranch as much as her condition allowed. Their son, Samuel Thomas Dawson, was born the following winter, a healthy, robust baby with his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair that promised to be as unruly as his mother's. Holding her son for the first time, Josephine felt a fierce surge of protective love unlike anything she had experienced before. This child would grow up knowing his worth, surrounded by parents who valued independence and courage. Preston proved to be a natural father, as devoted to his son as he was to his wife. He built a cradle with his own hands, spent hours talking to the infant about the ranch and the animals, and never complained about the sleep lost to midnight feedings and early morning cries. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier but more fulfilling than before. Maria doted on Samuel, delighted to have a baby in the house again. Hank pretended gruffness but could often be found making wooden toys for the boy or telling him stories about the horses when he thought no one was listening. Thomas visited as promised, thrilled to meet his great-nephew and bearing gifts both practical and whimsical. He became a regular visitor to the ranch, his presence further cementing the sense of family that had grown around Josephine. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler to an energetic young boy, the ranch continued to thrive. Using part of her inheritance, Josephine and Preston purchased additional grazing land and expanded their breeding program to include not just horses for work, but also finer animals for racing and showing. The Dawson Ranch brand became known throughout the territory for quality and fair dealing. When Samuel was 4, Josephine gave birth to a second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Maria, after Preston's mother and the woman who had become like a second mother to Josephine. Elizabeth had Josephine's hazel eyes and Preston's gentle temperament, a perfect complement to her more boisterous older brother. Through it all, Josephine never forgot where she had come from or how she had found her way to this life. She insisted that a portion of the ranch's profits each year be donated to organizations helping women in difficult circumstances, particularly those trying to escape abusive situations. It was her way of extending to others the lifeline Preston had once offered her. Occasionally, news would reach them from Bisbee. Josephine's father had suffered financial setbacks after the collapse of several mining ventures. Harold Wilcox had eventually married a widow from Tucson, only to die of a heart attack 2 years later, leaving his entire fortune to his new wife. Such information no longer pained Josephine. She had long since made her peace with her past, focusing instead on the family and future she and Preston were building together. 10 years after their wedding, as they sat on the porch watching their children play with the newest litter of puppies born to their faithful ranch dog, Preston took Josephine's hand in his. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "The way your life turned out?" Josephine looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? How could I possibly regret finding everything I never knew I wanted?" "Sometimes I think about that day at the auction," Preston admitted. "How different things might have been if I hadn't been in town that day, if I hadn't seen what was happening." "But you were, and you did," Josephine said simply. "And every day since then, you've shown me what it means to be truly valued." She squeezed his hand. "You know, my father thought he was punishing me that day, teaching me that my independence would only bring me shame. Instead, he sent me straight to the man who would appreciate that independence more than anything else about me." Preston smiled, lifting her hand to his lips. "Your father's loss was the greatest gain of my life." "And mine," Josephine agreed, leaning against his shoulder as they watched their children chase the puppies across the yard, their laughter filling the air with joy. That night, lying beside her husband in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the frightened, angry young woman on that auction platform to the confident, fulfilled woman, she was now wife, mother, partner in one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Preston stirred beside her, his arm tightening around her waist as if, even in sleep, he wanted to keep her close. Josephine smiled, covering his hand with her own. In the end, what had seemed like the worst day of her life had led her to the best decision she had ever made: to trust this man, to build a life with him, to love without fear or reservation. Her family had sold her because she brought them shame. Preston had bought her and told her she brought him pride. But the truth was simpler and far more profound. They had found in each other exactly what they needed: acceptance, respect, partnership, and a love that only grew stronger with each passing day. As sleep finally claimed her, Josephine's last thought was one of gratitude, not just for the life she now had, but for the strength she had found within herself to embrace it fully. Some might say Preston had saved her that day in Bisbee, but Josephine knew better. He had simply recognized the value she had always possessed and given her the space to discover it for herself. And that, she reflected as she drifted off in the arms of the man she loved, was the greatest gift anyone could receive. In the years that followed, the Dawson family continued to flourish. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's head for business and his mother's independent spirit. Elizabeth developed a remarkable talent with horses, seeming to understand the animals in a way that even experienced trainers found impressive. And in their 15th year of marriage, Josephine and Preston welcomed a surprise addition, another son they named James Hank, after Preston's father and the loyal foreman who had become family. The ranch expanded further, becoming one of the most respected operations in Arizona territory. Preston and Josephine were known not just for their business acumen, but for their fairness and generosity, always willing to help neighbors in need or give second chances to those who had stumbled along the way. They never forgot how their story began at an auction block in Bisbee, where one man's cruelty had inadvertently led to a lifetime of happiness. And when people asked, as they sometimes did, how the respected Mrs. Dawson had met her husband, Josephine would smile and answer simply, "He saw something in me that no one else did, not even myself, and every day since, we've been discovering just how right he was."